Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to express my support for the bill presently before us for debate. Mr. Speaker, before I continue on the specifics of the bill and the context in which the bill is being put before us, Mr. Speaker, I would like you, Mr. Speaker, to allow me leave to say a few words, Mr. Speaker. Of course, as has been said by colleagues before, today is a historic day. And such is the impact of the significance of today, Mr. Speaker. I notice that even you have been making a few mistakes, Mr. Speaker. And it's a little unusual for the Honorable Speaker to get off course. And I trust, Mr. Speaker, it is the memories of July 26, 2021, Mr. Speaker. A day on which, Mr. Speaker, all the barking dogs, all the jackasses, all the mendicants came out to vote, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I know that the member for Mico South has left the chamber because I was going to ask him, how does it feel when the barking dogs finally bite, Mr. Speaker? But he's not here, Mr. Speaker. So I shall go on, Mr. Speaker, to express sincere thanks to all the constituents of mine who voted for me. And Mr. Speaker, I will tell you, I spent 5 years in opposition. And I learned what it is to be an elected representative. And it had its challenges. But Mr. Speaker, I will tell you, in the last year has brought new challenges. And I'm really, Mr. Speaker, admiring my colleagues who have served for multiple terms. The member for Vieux-Fort South, the member for Castries East, the member for Library, for Vieux-Fort North, and the member for Castries North, the member for Castries Central. And the member from Castries Central probably best knows the constituency that I represent because we serve next to each other. The demands that you face when you're in government, Mr. Speaker. And we all change. You move from being a member in opposition with a lot of time on your hands to visit everybody and spend a lot of time with them, to now having ministries to run and having to find that balance, Mr. Speaker. And of course, everybody sympathizes with you when you're in opposition and they give you patience, Mr. Speaker. But now you're in government, they want you to deliver for them as quickly as you could. So I must say to my constituents, not all are very happy with me now. They don't see me as often as before. I cannot meet all their needs immediately, Mr. Speaker. But there are some people, Mr. Speaker, in thanking the constituents who supported me, that I must mention, Mr. Speaker. If you start in Marigot, you must mention Corinne, Mr. Speaker. And if you go to Basses Joseph, you must mention Alan, Mr. Speaker. And of course, Mr. Speaker, you go to Fouacho, Mr. Speaker. And Goods is not with us anymore, nor Palace. But we still have Robert and Shockey and so many others, Mr. Speaker. The Leos and the Papins, the Sonnies, Mr. Speaker. And of course, if you go to the old cemetery hospital road, Mr. Speaker, my place self, Mr. Speaker, we have so many persons who worked so hard for this victory, from Fat Boy and Charlene and Sean and all the others, Mr. Speaker. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, that when they join me at my AGM on August 14th, and I present to them what I've been working on for the last year, and show them the transformation that will take place in Castries South, Mr. Speaker, I know they will be impressed with all the hard work I've been putting in for the last year. I'm not sure I want my colleagues to join me and to see all what I will present, Mr. Speaker. But I can tell you, we have quite a lot that we would want to discuss on that day. But I can say, Mr. Speaker, today, Mr. Speaker, that the Basses Joseph Road has started, Mr. Speaker. The Marigot Road has started, Mr. Speaker. The court in Cicero is being repaired right now, Mr. Speaker. The playing field in Cicero that was stopped in 2016, Mr. Speaker, will commence rehabilitation this week, Mr. Speaker, 1 year later. And the Basses Joseph Multipurpose Center that was stopped in 2016 will recommence, Mr. Speaker, in the next couple of weeks. all within 1 year, Mr. Speaker. This government is putting people first, Mr. Speaker. And I am proud, Mr. Speaker, of what we've done. I can speak of so many others, the housing repairs, the school assistance, the food vouchers. So much we've done, Mr. Speaker, in 1 year, that I certainly feel proud to be a member of this government, Mr. Speaker, and for us to be delivering to the people of St. Lucia. But, Mr. Speaker, the only sad note for today, Mr. Speaker, is that the opposition still does not learn some of the fundamentals, Mr. Speaker. They don't, Mr. Speaker. They still believe they did everything right and the people are ungrateful for not returning them to office, Mr. Speaker. They believe that. They honestly believe that. And I heard the member from Strozel Saltibus, Mr. Speaker, my dear friend, I heard it called New Spain. And it's the most disturbing call ever made. And I wonder, Mr. Speaker, what's happening to the ponytail, Mr. Speaker? Because, Mr. Speaker, there seems to be something wrong with even him, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, he is saying the reason why they lost the elections is because the Labour Party is so good at half-truths. And I'm saying to myself, but they are masters of untruths, Mr. Speaker. You know, they don't even know the value of truth and honesty in government. They don't, Mr. Speaker. And he's saying they were always on the back foot and they should have been on the front foot. And he was speaking in relation to the agreement that was signed last week by the Prime Minister for the Grand Hyatt Hotel. And he was complaining, Mr. Speaker. The same member in 2016 who said we don't need hotels in Strozel, we just need factory shells. He said it.
Member for Strozel, you have a point of,
point of
an
order.
interruption.
Point of order.
And the point of order.
The member is misleading, you know. Mr. Speaker, the member knows I did not compare my factory, as he said, my warehouse, to the hotel. I did say very clearly, Mr. Speaker, that any project coming to the community of Strozel that will benefit the community, I will support. I never made a comparison to my incubator program versus the hotel. So I just want the member to get that right.
Mr. Speaker, I recall he said, I prefer warehouses. And I was more generous to him. I said factory shells, which suggests factories. He said warehouses to store things. But, Mr. Speaker, let's move on, Mr. Speaker. Let's move on. I think, Mr. Speaker, the point I want to make is that maybe the opposition can reflect, Mr. Speaker, and recognize that you cannot disrespect St. Lucians. You cannot say the things you said to them. You cannot treat them with disdain. And it's a lesson for all of us in politics. And this Prime Minister keeps reminding us to stay grounded. To stay grounded, Mr. Speaker, because of the sensitivities of how you serve people, Mr. Speaker. So I want to say to him, Mr. Speaker, the only people worse than Trump are people like Mitch McDonnell and those people that defend the nonsense that Trump does. And he's very quickly falling into the trap of defending the indefensible of Alan Chastney, Mr. Speaker. And he better take note of it, because the next time he probably wouldn't be so lucky to keep the Strozel seat, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, this bill today is significant. And I think the member for Castries East highlighted how significant it is when he said he was a little unhappy having to come here today to present such a bill that imposes strict penalties on persons for having firearms. And, Mr. Speaker, if you sit back and you reflect on it, and you recall the member from Beaufort South in a presentation to this House a couple of sittings ago, trace all that has been done over the years to try to stem crime in St. Lucia. And he reminded us, from 1997, Mr. Speaker, when he became Prime Minister, we had a situation where prisoners and police officers were using the same washrooms, same toilets. He reminded us of the state of police stations around the island and how many police stations were rehabilitated, were built under his administration. He reminded us of the amount that was done to equip the police. And I know firsthand, I was involved in Cricket World Cup, I know the amount of equipment we gave to the police then. He reminded us. He reminded us, Mr. Speaker, of the laws and the changes, the new criminal code, and all those pieces of legislation that were enacted, all with the hope of stemming criminality in this country, Mr. Speaker, and promoting citizen security. Yet we find ourselves where we are today. And it really raises the question, what can we really do, Mr. Speaker? And last night in preparing to come here this morning, I went to read a document, Mr. Speaker, and it was quite instructive. And some of my colleagues here might remember it. In 1996-97, the then government, the United Workers' Party government, I don't think the member from Cassius North was yet Minister of Youth, a national task force on indiscipline was established in St. Lucia, chaired by the then PS Education, Dr. 1987-88. Yeah, they had just become. And I'd beg him not to do it, Mr. Speaker, but that's another story. The PS of Education then, I think, was Dr. Frederick. And he chaired a national task force on indiscipline. And the National Youth Council made a presentation by Mario Michel, Mr. Speaker, on indiscipline in St. Lucia. You remember that member for Cassius North. And then Mario Michel predicted, he said he was looking at the society through an optimistic eye and through a pessimistic eye, and saying all the things we should do for our young people and the society for us not to reach a certain destination. And he said through his pessimistic eye, all the things, if we did not do it, where we would end up. And we've ended up very close to where he said we could end up, Mr. Speaker. Because there were certain fundamentals we felt then as youth leaders had to be put in place to make sure that degradation we were seeing in the society would not take place. And we failed our young people, Mr. Speaker. I was a young youth leader then, but I can see now that I am part of the leadership of the country that we failed our young people, Mr. Speaker. But what is also ironic, in his critique, there was largely a blame on television. So those are the days when CNN and WGN and wrestling and all those things were being brought into St. Lucia. We call it the television of society. Little did he know there would be something even worse than that called social media, Mr. Speaker. And what it can do in terms of orienting your young people, what it would do to changing the values of our people, not just young. But he made a most telling statement that we were making indiscipline synonymous with young people. And he said that there was more indiscipline at the other stratas of society and not just the youth in St. Lucia. And if we make crime equal youth, we are doomed to fail. And we did that. We did that. And today we are where we are. But the St. Lucia Labour Party, when in government, has a long, long history of the number of social interventions that we have put in place, Mr. Speaker. And I can never forget how hurt I was when there were suggestions from the other side. The member from Strozal Saltibus was not there yet. That if you introduce a STEP program, that was a backward step. Just think about that. At a time when so many persons are unemployed, hustling and struggling to survive, and we thought we can put in place short-term employment programs to give them a little something, a little soulagement, to just keep them going. We were condemned for doing this. We were told we were wasting resources. And up to the last government, where the member from Strozal Saltibus was, they were saying this Labour Party has a habit of wasting money, giving away to people, creating mendicants. How can helping people who don't have and are crying out for need, Mr. Speaker? And if you provide the social intervention programs to help them, that's creating mendicants, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if any other parliamentary rep will speak. I have had people come to me and tell me, Bossman, I have to commit a crime today. I am nothing. Some of them might be exaggerating when they tell you that. But some of them come to you and they tell you that, Bossman, my children ain't eat for 2 days yet. What I go do? And you have to face that reality. You have to face that reality, Mr. Speaker. And I am not condoning anything that any of them would do. But the point I am making, Mr. Speaker, is as we pass this legislation, and we need to pass it, we must never forget that we need equally to apply ourselves to the programs that will help alleviate the struggles and the sufferings of some of our marginalized and dispossessed people in the society. We cannot forget that, Mr. Speaker. So we must never encourage them, and we must always support a criminal justice system that is effective and efficient. But we must never forget equally, we have a duty to intervene and to provide support for those who do not wish to go down that road, but sometimes end up there. You heard the member from Castries speak about it, and he gave a very practical, and those of us who know the streets will tell you it happens. People will pay young people in particular, vulnerable young people, small sums of money to transport items for them. And they have nothing in their pocket. And they believe that they can get away with it. And they will take the chance. And he said it, when you are arrested and you put in, it's not the bossman that's serving time with you. And those messages must come across. But we must also be there to give them the alternative, Mr. Speaker. Because I support this legislation wholeheartedly. I detest guns, Mr. Speaker, on the streets. And what it can do, Mr. Speaker. I mean, I can tell you the names in the last 5-6 years as a parliamentarian of people who've died from gun violence from my constituency. I can tell you even before. I can tell you even closer to home. So we must not, Mr. Speaker, object to the necessity of such legislation. But I want to always appeal that we must equally be committed to providing the social intervention, Mr. Speaker, for those who may be in the vulnerable positions, that we can deter them as well, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member from Strozel-Saltibus raised the issue of the board versus the singular commission of police. And I ask you, Mr. Speaker, to just reflect on it. Which would you rather approve a firearm license? A sole individual of 5 people, Mr. Speaker? A sole individual? I mean, the claim is that some of the 5 might be influenced, but can the one not be influenced? I mean, think about it. One person has the discretion whether to approve or not. He can be influenced. He can be persuaded otherwise or to support it. Would you take your chances if 1 or with 5 making the right decision? Maybe one of the 5 might be influenced, but they still have 4. When the one out of the 1 is influenced, what do you have as a check and balance? How could you ever prefer one person making a decision as against 5 qualified persons to make the decision? Explain that to me. But the same individuals will support a minister appointing boards and appointing other persons to other statutory agencies, Mr. Speaker. And the inconsistency really exposes its nakedness, Mr. Speaker. So I don't see the logic. I would quickly accept you probably saying of the 3 persons to be appointed, one should have a legal background, one should have a law enforcement background. If you had said so, I would say yes, you are strengthening what is there. But to say you rather one person make the decision than 5 persons, I cannot really see the logic in it, Mr. Speaker. And then the point is made about the tasers. The truth is, the tasers are already classified under other legislation. It is. The customs sees it when they get it, and it's provided for under another piece of legislation. But I take it is a genuine attempt to get clarification, and I think the leader, the Prime Minister, will address that when he speaks. But tasers themselves are becoming of concern to us, because I was surprised to learn when the Attorney General briefed us as to the prevalence of tasers, in the society. For some people, it's a defensive weapon rather than an offensive weapon, but the fact is it can be offensive, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I am particularly Hatton to read of the penalties for assault weapons, Mr. Speaker. I believe, and I think a Calypsonian recently said it, that if your gun's bigger than the police own off to Ukraine, and that ratata is not for the streets, these are instruments of war for the killing of people in numbers, Mr. Speaker. And I think the harshest penalty should be given to them, Mr. Speaker. So I support this in particular, Mr. Speaker. They have no place for those automatic assault weapons in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. There's no place for it. So you have my fullest support on those provisions. Again, I want to join the Prime Minister to say to our young people who have been exploited because they are in vulnerable situations to think over and over before they engage in any act that will bring them faulty before this legislation. So, Mr. Speaker, I rest my case and I support the legislation.